Now, what I'm going to talk about very briefly is a piece by Schoenberg, a very expressionist piece of music called Piero Lunaire. And you're all going to regret the day you came to class today. Does Schoenberg's music survive? Well, I don't think, since I've been in Springfield, that I've even heard a piece by Schoenberg. I know that I have certainly played Schoenberg and enjoy it. It is not quite the accessible music that we've known in this class. I mean, you guys were okay with the Rite of Spring. This might be a little over the top for you, so this is where the first time in this course I'm going to have to say, keep an open mind. Keep an open mind. So, atonality, absence of key, okay? Absence of key. This is a normal progression, people, a normal progression. We talked about Wagner and how he's avoiding resolution. This is quite a normal progression to atonality, composing without a central tone. And the piece we're going to look at is called Piero Lunaire, okay? Like Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, composed around the same time, Schoenberg's Piero Lunaire, or in English, Moonstruck Piero, is certainly a revolutionary masterpiece that influenced 20th century music. And you're all going to go, what? After you hear it. You know? What is this? First of all, okay, it is a cycle of 21 songs, okay? It is a cycle of 21 songs for female voice and an ensemble of 5 musicians that play 8 instruments. Now, how confusing is that? Now, I'm just going to name these instruments. You don't have to know this. Piano, cello, violin, viola, flute, piccolo, clarinet, and bass clarinet. And each song is going to be different in instrumentation. Right there, with that combination of instruments, people, that in itself is modern, right? We haven't talked about that. We haven't talked about just this combination of instruments. Some of the, for example, the Sick Moon, which is number 7, only uses flute. Prayer to Piero uses the piano and clarinet. So we're looking at a lot of different combinations. There's a real novelty in this piece of music, and this is something I want you to know. And don't worry in here. We'll figure this out as we go, because my computer's broken. And I will say this word. The novelty in this piece of music that you'll all probably snicker at a little bit is called, ready? Sprechstimme. Spell that. No, don't. I will spell it for you later. Sprechstimme. Everybody say it. Sprechstimme. Don't spit. Sprechstimme. Okay? And I'm just going to tell you, it's speech, song. Okay? Speech and song. Half speaking, half singing. And this actual technique was developed by Schoenberg. The rhythms and pitches of words are precisely notated, but the voice touches a notated pitch, believe it or not, only momentarily, and then departs from it. You're going to hear a lot of that, and it's true, right? So that's called Sprechstimme, and it is a technique. It is a style of singing. Okay, Piero Lunaire is based on some very weird poetry. It's expressionist poetry written in 1884 by a Belgian poet by the name of Albert Giraud, and later translated into German. Many of the poems deal with the puppet Piero, a tragic clown character derived from the centuries-old Commedia dell'arte. You've seen it before if you've seen the opera Pagliacci, right? The idea of the clown. And Piero is the isolated modern artist, is what he is. And what a perfect place to do this. In the era of Expressionism, we have the isolated modern artist. And this was a favorite subject of artists, writers, and musicians, certainly in the late 19th century and in the 20th century. So we have 3 groups of 7 songs, and we have a lot of surrealistic visions, people. The first group is Piero the Drunk, okay? Drunk on what? Drunk on moonlight, okay? I'm gonna do the poetry in a second. The second group is a nightmare filled with images of death and martyrdom. The third group, Piero seeks refuge from the nightmare through clowning, sentimentality, and nostalgia. And so this is really eerie and very, very, very odd. Okay? And so we are going to listen to Moon Drunk. And it is scored for voice, piano, flute, violin, and cello. And it begins our crazy journey. And I would just like to read you the poetry. The wine that with eyes is drunk at the moon pours down in waves, and a spring flood overflows the silent horizon. Desires, shuddering and sweet, swim countless through the floods. The wine that is with eyes is drunk at the night the moon pours down in waves. The poet whom devotion inspires, made drunk by the sacred drink, toward heaven he turns. His entranced head and reeling sucks and slurps the wine that with eyes is drunk. Okay. Its text depicts moonlight as a sacrament, okay? As a sacrament. Wine we drink through the eyes. And the poet Piero becomes intoxicated. And so it is very soft and light in texture, and I'm not going to say much else. And what I want you to do is, I just want you to listen to it. And please, please keep an open mind. Please remember, this is expressionism. So the moon, the whole idea of being drunk through eyes, that the moon is making you drunk, okay? It's a wonderful picture. It's a wonderful picture. And so this is Piero Lunaire, which is a song cycle, and this is a piece that contains atonality. So we are far gone from C major and C minor. Remember that? That's gone, okay? And so what we're hearing is, again, atonal music. And again, this is the first movement and first song, and it's called Moon Drunk.
Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in Wogen nieder. Und eine Springglut überschwemmt den Stil.
That was the first song from the song cycle Piero Lunaire, Opus 21, written in 1912. And so we see now that things don't necessarily have to be pretty, right? This isn't necessarily about pretty, right? And this, again, Schoenberg, the first guy to fall off the cliff. We've been going to that cliff, and there we go. Splat, okay? So, is everybody still okay? Still okay? Because it's just going to get weirder. Okay, and his students, Alban Berg and Webern, also tremendously successful. And people like Stravinsky dabbled in the 12-tone system as well. Okay? So a very, very influential composer, and one that influenced composers to come. So that is Schoenberg, and that is Expressionism. Okay, we've just been over in Germany and Austria talking about Expressionism, and now we're going to pay a visit to Eastern Europe, to a really, really interesting composer. The composer's name, Bela Bartók. And I'm going to open with a quote from Mr. Bartók. What is the best way for a composer to reap the full benefits of his studies in peasant music? It is to assimilate the idiom of peasant music so completely that he is able to forget all about it and use it as his musical mother tongue. And that is Bartók. That right there is the reason why his music is so interesting. He is going to assimilate Eastern European folk song into his music. Okay, into his music. It was his mission. Bela Bartók, 1881, died 1945. He created an entirely personal musical language. We've talked about nationalism. This is nationalism, certainly at its best. And he revealed himself to be one of the major prophets of the 20th century, and certainly for Eastern Europe. He was born in Hungary, studied at the Royal Academy in Budapest, where he came into contact with the nationalist movement that aimed to shake off the domination of German musical culture. Here's another place they're doing it, right? We've seen it in France, and now we're going to see it in Eastern Europe. His interest in folklore led him to realize that what passed for Hungarian in the eyes of the world, the idiom romanticized by who else? Liszt, of course. We've talked about Franz Liszt and his music from Hungary. That he would not only use those wonderful folk idioms popularized by Liszt, but he would also use the music of the peasants, the music specifically also of the gypsies. And so he proceeded to collect over 2,000 examples of Eastern European and North African folk music. Those days I spent in the villages among the peasants were the happiest of my life. In order really to feel the vitality of this music, one must, so to speak, have lived it. And this is possible only when one comes to know it by direct contact with the peasants. And so he went on his way. And this, of course, took years. In 1907, he was appointed pianist, professor to the Royal Academy in Budapest, and he was a fantastic pianist. And we will see that he wrote 3 piano concertos, very tremendously difficult pieces of music. We also have Bartók on CD. Right upstairs in the music library, we actually have recordings of Bartók playing. And that's very good, people. When you have the composer playing the music, you have the inside track on how it goes. And boy, do I wish we had something from Mr. Bach, you know, because it's such, you know, it's so difficult to play. And so I really wish we did. So we do have a clue as to how this would sound. Together with another composer by the name of Kodály, they founded a society for the preservation of contemporary music. And unfortunately, Bartók, the project was defeated by the apathy of a public that refused to be weaned from the traditional German repertory. Okay? So he was kind of held back a lot of the time in the beginning. He resumed his folklore studies, and during the First World War devoted himself also, which I think is interesting, to a collection of soldier songs as well. After 1918, after the First World War, this national fervor, you know, we talked about how after the Napoleonic Wars, we have this idea of this nationalistic identity that people were seeking. That's the same thing that happened after World War I. And it is no shock that all of a sudden Bartók would become very famous with his nationalistic movement. And in the ensuing decade after World War I, Bartók really becomes a leading figure in the musical life of both Europe and Eastern Europe, but especially that of Hungary. He was an avid, what should I say, he did not conform to the Nazis. And this is something I highly, highly respect from Bartók. He would not, he protested performances of his music on the Berlin radio and took every opportunity to make an anti-fascist stand. And I really admire that in Bartók. But he wouldn't compromise. He says, "He who stays on when he could leave may be said to acquiesce in everything that is happening here." So instead of conforming, he left. And where did he go? He came to the United States in 1940 and settled in the Big Apple, New York City. Unfortunately, Bartók was diagnosed with leukemia, and his concerts were few and far between. He really suffered, unfortunately. He worked feverishly, however, to complete his 3rd piano concerto, and finally, yes, a concerto for viola. I don't think I've said that yet, which he did not finish, which his friend, Tibor Surly, finished. I really do love the music of Bartók. It is tremendously, tremendously interesting. He is able to take all of this wonderful music and incorporate it into his individuality. And it is very accessible music, sometimes very harsh, but always interesting. We're listening to different kinds of scales, scale structures. Is it atonal? At times, maybe. But it is certainly music we can really connect to. And he worked with tremendous speed, even when he was very, very ill. And we also know Bartók as one of the greatest composers of string quartets after that of Beethoven and Shostakovich. Bartók has 6 gems of string quartets. Any one of them, any string player would say, let's sit down, let's go. He really knew that idiom very, very well. So what are we going to look at? We're going to look at a piece that was written in the summer of 1943, right at the end of his life, called Concerto for Orchestra. So here's Bartók. He's actually sitting in a hospital when the conductor of the Boston Symphony, Serge Kouzavitsky, comes in and says, hey, I'm going to give you some money. I want to commission a piece of music. And he was able to come up with this piece of music in October of that year. The general mood of the work, he wrote, represents, apart from the jesting second movement, a gradual transition from the sternness of the first movement and the lugubrious death song of the third to the life assertion of the last. And so it's kind of an interesting scope. I mean, here's a dying man, and at the end we have life assertion. And so this is a real gripping, very gripping work. It's called Concerto for Orchestra. Now, immediately something should come to your mind. What's a concerto? What was it? What is it? Right? What is a concerto? Somebody? Do you remember? Oh boy, this final exam's not going to be good. A concerto, a piece for soloist and orchestra. And so this is a concerto for orchestra. How interesting. And what he's doing is he's going to highlight every single section of the orchestra. And my friends, let me tell you, this is very, very difficult music. So it really feels like you're playing a concerto, let me tell you, because of the difficulty factor. And it's this element of virtuosity. Remember we talked about a concerto and how you ham it up and you're able to show off? That's exactly what Bartók is doing in this piece of music. And we have an introduction. And you all will be listening to the second movement, which is one of my most favorite from Bartók. And it's called Gioco della Coppia. And it means game of pairs. And it's called game of pairs because the wind instruments are paired up at specific intervals. And the bassoons are the interval of a sixth. The oboes, the interval of a third. Clarinet in sevenths, flutes in fifths. Trumpets in seconds. Ooh, you know what a second is, right? Just go like that. That's a second. So we'll get some interesting dissonances as well. And Bartók himself calls it a jesting movement. So it is meant in fun, that's for sure. And so we'll listen to this. It is in 5 sections, very elaborate instrumentation. And this will give you a taste of Bartók and a taste of the rather jesting side of Bartók. And so this is the second movement from Concerto for Orchestra by Béla Bartók. That was the second movement of Concerto for Orchestra, written in 1923. And Bartók really was an innovator in many, many, many different ways. And that was just a taste of what he really gives us. He wrote music for children, to teach children how to play the piano. He wrote 6 great string quartets. a whole an opera, a whole slew of very interesting works, music for strings, percussion, and celesta, the Miraculous Mandarin, a lot of these really interesting rhythms in his pieces that go with these peasant dances. And so for us as musicians, it is sometimes very difficult to do, very difficult to get through Bartók. And any pianist will tell you that those 3 piano concertos are very, very difficult as well. A great spirit of the 20th century. Very, very interesting music.